one of the interesting questions is the role of the CIO in the digital business world. And there are 2 or 3 categories of CIOs when you ask that question. One is that there are some CIOs that are seen as very strong business leaders within their enterprise. So if there's a CIO who's also seen as a very strong and credible business leader, they are the natural leaders in the digital business space, and they almost by default acquire that position because as I discussed earlier, 80% of everything about digital business is about technology or information technology. So the CIO is the logical candidate. The second category is where the CIO is seen as a strong technology leader but doesn't have the business skills. This is where we are finding the CEOs will either then bring in someone like a CDO, a Chief Digital Officer, who is given responsibility for the business aspects of driving digital business, and the CIO then becomes a support function to that CDO role. The other power center that's emerging is the Chief Marketing Officer, the CMO, because a lot of the digital business activity is really to do with the customer. So some CEOs are taking the call that a CMO, who at the end of the day is the keeper of that customer relationship, by giving the technology responsibility to him or her, they can actually put both of those critical aspects in one power center. So the CMO acquiring a strong IT capability within his or her organization is the third approach that we are seeing. In any of these 3 cases, the CIO has a strong role to play. If that CIO is a business leader, then they drive it independently. If they're not the business leader, it is imperative for the CIO to actually have strong collaboration with either the CMO or the CDO. If that collaboration doesn't exist, then it always is at odds. It's hard for a CMO to drive digital business if they don't have the cooperation and support of the CIO. So if there are political barriers or personality barriers or cultural barriers, that becomes a problem. And often that is the imperative of the CIO to ensure that those bridges are built. So interestingly, when you talk about the Indian environment from a CIO, CDO, CMO perspective, one of the challenges is that in India, if I were to think of one role that seems to have even lesser prominence than the CIO, it is the CMO. Many Indian organizations don't have a really powerful C-level marketing person. Marketing in many organizations is just a fancy word for sales support. So that CMO role, other than a few stray organizations, is actually missing in India. So the CMO prominence is not as much as we see in other parts of the world. But what is interesting is the conversations I'm having increasingly with CEOs, sometimes along with their CIOs or sometimes independently, as well as COOs, again, sometimes with their CIOs or independently, on the need for a CDO and how do they structure that CDO role, what are the capabilities they look for. Anecdotally, if I look at the extent of those conversations in India, it is not very different from other parts of the world. So if I were to extrapolate from that, I would suggest that the pace at which Indian enterprises are looking at, I wouldn't say aggressively adopting yet, but looking at and setting up the building blocks to have an effective digital business strategy, I think India is on par with the world. The other data point is a recent CEO, so we do a CEO survey every year. The recent one, and I just published the Asia Pacific version of it, about 40 CEOs from India responded, so it's fairly representative of the findings we had at an Asia Pacific level. 87% of CEOs said that they are either have a digital strategy in place, are actively pursuing one, or will pursue one in the next year to 18 months. So if you look at that as a data point and say that that is reasonably reflective of India, I think the digital business paradigm in India is actually gaining a lot of momentum. So when you look at the role CIOs have in developing a digital business strategy, the first best practice would be don't assume you can do it alone. This is not about IT going into a cave and coming up with a digital business strategy and presenting it to the organization. It is really a collaborative cross-enterprise effort. So the best practice there is how do you create a collaborative framework with possibly, again, if the CIO is seen as a business leader, he or she can drive that effort. But even in that situation, it's not an effort they can do independently. So they need to have strong cross-sponsorship and collaboration with all of their business peers. That's step one. The second step is to have a very clear view of the industry reality. So really stepping outside of the organization and creating a view of what is the reality in our industry in terms of what are the customer expectations today and in the future, what are the customer demographics that we are serving today and in the future, what are the competitive forces, is it traditional competition or is it completely new competition from some of the technology majors? If you look at our banking segment, that's exactly the evaluation they're going through. So assessing the industry view. The third is assessing the enterprise personality profile. That's the term we use in Gartner, which is the appetite for risk and appetite for big change within the enterprise. When you put these three together, that becomes an ingredient of the principles of digital business generally are well known, and in a sense, I think we have written the book on it. If you Google digital business on Gartner, on Google, the first 4 entries that come are all Gartner references. So that is reasonably understood, and if you're a client, we can tell you. The issue really is how do you create the internal collaborative environment in order to execute on what someone like a Gartner can tell you. That is the bigger secret sauce in my view. And then it is a process of, as I said, identifying the elements of the definition and adapting it to your organization to say, what does blurring physical and digital mean to us? Second is, what is the role of things in our enterprise? And the last element is putting all this together to say, this is our 1-year roadmap to morph into a digital business strategy.